Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sackur. It is the job of the professional satirist to find the funny and expose the absurd in humanity's most serious endeavours. But are there times when satire just doesn't work? Should we be laughing at COVID-19 or racial discrimination? Well, my guest today is the hugely successful writer and director of comedy on television and film, Armando Iannucci. Is there ever a bad time and place to be funny? Armando Iannucci, welcome to Hard Talk.
Hello.
It's good to have you on the show at a very difficult time. I just wonder, with reference to coronavirus and everything else that is happening right now, do you need to be in a certain frame of mind to write, and in particular to write funny?
I mean, that's interesting. I mean, it's good. I've got some structure to the day because we're actually in the middle of writing a new series of Avenue 5, which is the sort of sci-fi comedy we do for HBO. But on the other hand, that show's premise is about 6,500 people being trapped in a spaceship that they can't get out of and suffering a fundamental lack of leadership. And it's very difficult under these circumstances to feel. I can certainly empathise with that, but it's very difficult to see the funny side of it because it is so real and so kind of current at the moment.
Yeah, and I asked the question partly because I feel you've been quite honest in recent things you've said in public, and I'm just going to quote one where you said, do people really want gags from someone like me who is right now running low on good cheer?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a hard time for everyone, and I think, you know, a lot of good has come out of the lockdown in terms of the higher profile and importance we now see with care workers and people on the front line. It's given everyone a time to sort of just step back from the craziness of the world and assess everything. But it's also been hard. People have been dying. People have been falling dangerously ill. I think every family, mine has, every family has been affected by it and touched by it. And I don't necessarily see my job, if I even think of it as a job, as someone who has to wake up every morning and first thing that I say to myself is, what shall I make fun of today? I've never seen it like that. I've always felt that what you do as a writer or someone who works in comedy is to write about what makes you passionate, what makes you enthusiastic, what makes you angry, what makes you frustrated, all these things, something that stirs something in you. And it's that. That article you quoted from was me really 2 or 3 weeks into the lockdown, just reflecting on how actually, you know, now or then may not have been the time to do lots and lots of funny stuff about the predicament we were in. I think as 14 weeks have gone on, I think we are now beginning to get a handle on what has worked and what hasn't worked.
Yeah, no, that's interesting because I think I and many people associate you with being a great willingness to go into the darker corners of the human experience and to find humour in places where most of us wouldn't even dare look. And I'm thinking of everything from, you know, the Iraq War to the machinations of political process to, you know, and we'll talk about it in more detail later, the death of Stalin. You know, you find the funny in the weirdest places. So could you not find it in COVID-19?
I think my instinct was really that it'll come when it comes. You know, I think was so immersed in it, and I think the ones who are finding the funny are the ones who actually, strangely enough, have a much more journalistic bent to their comedy. People like John Oliver, who has a whole team of researchers and factual researchers as well, investigative researchers, and he turns that knowledge and that factual information into something funny. And if he does it so well, I don't see that's where I fit in. I think yes, of course I'll end up doing something about it, but I think I need that moment to suddenly arrive. And also things are changing so rapidly that any dramatic reconstruction of what's happening now is by the time it's ready is going to be instantly out of date. I think things will have moved on so much. Politics is going through such a crazy tumble dryer period at the moment, where things are crashing around and changing all the time. That I think you're more. I predict you would have a higher success rate, I think, if you're doing something on a daily or a weekly basis, really.
What I do notice about your focus at the moment is often in terms of Twitter and your public profile, you're writing very serious things. You know, you're not trying to be funny, you're actually making some very serious points, not least about the dangers faced by the creative industries, from theatre to your own film and TV business, by what has come with COVID-19, including all of the lockdown measures, the social distancing, the impossibility to fill theatres and live venues, at least indoors. Do you really think that this is something all of us, whether we're connected to the entertainment business or not, have to care about?
Absolutely, and I find it's very difficult, I know, to plead for money for the arts, because inevitably you say, what about hospitals, what about schools and so on? But economically, just looking at the UK, which is my prime argument, they're going to be the last thing that open up, just because they involve large performance spaces and large numbers of people. They're expensive to run. But because they're going to be the last things to open up, they're the ones in the most danger of shutting down for good. And if you think, first of all, how much... Oh, there goes part of my... I don't
retract 10 seconds. Yeah, Armando, just...
ears. If you think about how much culture and the arts has sustained us through the lockdown, the fact that every day we're reading new books, we're watching more on Netflix or on streaming services or on the BBC or on the iPlayer, we're downloading, we're looking at art, we're looking, how much they get us through. So they're that important. But also economically, I did a speech for the Edinburgh Television Festival about 4 or 5 years ago, and I was researching the figures, and the creative industries in the UK contribute more to our national GDP than the oil and car industry put together. And yet it's very easy, I think, for a government minister to support the car industry or to support the energy industry, to support aviation, to support tourism. And I think they find it difficult. I don't know whether it's a very British thing, that it somehow sounds slightly too clever for your own good and too highfalutin to support the arts and to culture. But it's so crucial to the economy.
It seems to me that right now, that there's a crisis of confidence in your business, and I'm particularly thinking actually of comedy, whether it be live comedy or the sorts of comedy on TV and film that you do. A crisis of confidence that isn't just born out of the post-corona economic issues that the industry faces, but also questions and issues of identity and what comedy is really for and what it's allowed to be. And I'm thinking particularly of the debates that have arisen in recent weeks post the killing of George Floyd in the United States about race and comedy. And you will have seen, just as we all have, that the BBC, for example, has gotten itself into a bit of a mess, taking an edition of Fawlty Towers, for example, off one of its streaming services for a while because it was deemed to be causing too much offence because of racial stereotyping and offence that it could have caused. As a very senior voice in comedy in the UK right now, what do you make of what is happening?
You make me sound like some company board member or
the voice of comedy speaks.
No, I mean, it's interesting. Each one of those examples, and there was something similar with HBO Max taking Gone with the Wind off. In the end, those programs and that film came back on, but they came back with an explanation as to why some people might find elements within it offensive or placing it within a historical context. And I think it's important that we don't do a kind of jerk reaction, a nervous reaction, and diss everything from the past. I think there's an understanding in most people that attitudes, language, behaviour, tolerance was very different 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 100 years ago. And for me, what I'm more concerned with is less what we do about stuff we made in the past, because I think those debates will flare up and then disappear within 3 or 4 days on each specific example. I think what's more fundamental, what's more important, is what we do going forward. I've had a film that came out in the UK, Personal History of David Copperfield, which is now being released internationally, in which David Copperfield is played by Dev Patel. And it interested me that quite a lot of people initially, before seeing the film, would pick up on that as an example of strangely, you know, the phrase is colorblind casting, which I find slightly negative and limiting as a phrase. For me, I just chose Dev Patel because he, for me, was the actor who most represented what I saw in the character of David Copperfield, his sort of energy and his, you know, appetite for life and his delight and imagination and everything. And I couldn't have imagined making the film without anyone else. But then once I cast David, I then asked myself, how do I cast everyone else? Well, I should cast the way I cast David. Just find the actor who best inhabits the spirit of that character, irrespective of their, you know, background, ethnicity. I just want the best actor. Why should I not be able to choose from 100% of the acting talent available to me?
That's a great cue, Armando, for us just to play a very short clip from the David Copperfield movie that, as you say, is now going to be seen around the world. It's so interesting that you have put out there a movie which, frankly, Charles Dickens, when he wrote it, would not have imagined David Copperfield would be, you know, look like a man of South Asian origin, but that, you say, is precisely the point, that this is about common humanity and that colour doesn't matter. Let's have a look at the clip.
Mr. Dick! Mr. Dick! Mr. Dick!
Is it lunch?
The troubling thoughts from King Charles's head, they weigh you down.
Yes, I try and keep them in order, but they do pile up and oppress me. As I die, I move from the corruptible crown to
No. Mr. Dick, we can release them. We can cast them to the wind.
I'll say that I'm feeling much better.
You have to fly it first. Come on. Kite time!
Lead on! Lead on!
That's it, Mr. Dick!
Fly!
Steady!
I can't believe it! The sky is absorbing my words!
The higher the words go,
The clearer my mind becomes! Oh, I haven't felt like this. It's as if I'm reading for the bar again. Before everything, I used to share a staircase with Tommy Traddles. He was a terrific fellow. Un camarade très formidable, as the French say. Well, now, there's the thing. I'd completely forgotten that I can speak French.
How far can your approach to find the common humanity and to cast in a way that leaves aside issues of skin colour, how far can that go? I mean, I just read the other day that Ian McKellen in his 80s is going to play Hamlet, usually regarded as a part for a young man, perhaps in his 20s, as the young prince. How far can this notion that you're seeking something beyond the obvious in characterization, how far can it go?
Well, I mean, everything, you remember the all-male Swan Lake, and there have been all-female Shakespeare productions of Julius Caesar, and no one, I think, is saying that one way they're making it should be the norm for every production or every film or every programme. I think these examples are just stating, especially with old works, adaptations of things that are very well known, that there are always new and fresh and interesting ways of interpreting it. There are always new and fresh ways of putting on a production that just opens people's eyes and ears to something new and allows people to see something new in it. For me, reading David Copperfield, I've been a huge fan of Charles Dickens all my life. What always appealed to me was, first of all, Dickens' humour, which is not something that is conveyed in some of the adaptations. Very often I think people grow up with the idea that Dickens wrote about mud and fog and death and crime, and that was it. And he's a very, very funny writer.
I want to return to the idea of offence in comedy and satire and where the lines are, because one of your big hits of recent years has been the movie Death of Stalin, which did extraordinarily well, got great reviews, and yet it did strike me that if you had even suggested to investors in the movie industry you were going to make a film about the death of Hitler that was going to be full of knockabout comedy involving Goering, Goebbels and Hess and others, they probably would have, laughed you out of the room. Why is it that one of the great mass murderers of the 20th century can be made fun of, albeit with serious undertones, but made fun of in a movie of yours and not actually cause offence to potentially millions of people across the former Soviet Union?
Well, you have to do it with great care, and when we started on the film, I said to cast, crew, everyone, that we have to be respectful of what actually happened to the people in the Soviet Union at the time, and the treatment of them in the gulags and in the torture places and the enormous amount of deaths. I wanted to treat honestly and directly and not make fun of. The comedy came from the characters in the Kremlin, the absurdity of their position, where they each felt that they had to stick to a line, because anyone who departed from the line could be shot, but no one knew what the line was. That struck me as where the comedy is the consequences of their decisions they make in that comic bubble that have very real tragic effects to people outside.
But actually, just to get clear about where the lines are, because it is fascinating. Do you believe you could have made the same kind of film about the last days of Hitler?
Well, I point you in the direction of Jojo Rabbit, which did. I point you to The Great Dictator, Charlie Chaplin, one of Charlie Chaplin's greatest films, made and released in 1941. When everyone knew, but so much more was to be known about the menace of Hitler. And what Charlie Chaplin did there was some of his funniest, most inventive comic routines, sitting next to very straight, very dramatic scenes set in the Jewish ghetto. And I have always said, I don't think you belittle a subject by making it the subject of comedy. Comedy allows you to come at something from an unexpected, unpredictable, unusual angle, and therefore it allows you to get closer, I think, sometimes to a subject than you might do if you were going through much more kind of natural drama. It just allows you to go. I did a lot of research for Death of Stalin. We went out to Moscow. We spoke to people who grew up under Stalin, who they told us that everyone had to pack a suitcase and have it by the door, because if you were dragged out in the middle of the night to the gulag, you could grab your suitcase with you and you had something to take. They went to bed with layers and layers of clothes on again, so if they were dragged out and taken off to Siberia, they had lots of warm clothing. And they all said the only way to do it is through comedy, because it's the absurdity of what was happening. Everyone knew it was stupid what was going on. And they told me of the existence of joke books, Stalin joke books, with terrible, sick jokes about Stalin and the gulags and so on. And if a neighbour heard you tell one of these jokes and reported you, you could be shot. And yet they said you still had to be able to joke. It was as if they were saying, Stalin can take away my family, he can take away my livelihood or my liberty, but if I can still make fun of him, he hasn't taken away my brain and my conscience.
If you look back over a long career, delving into difficult and dark corners, are there things you regret that you've done that you now think, with the cultural values of right now, you think, I wouldn't do that again?
I think, as I say, language changes, attitudes change. I can think of a sketch I did about 20 years ago, and it was about racist police horses. I thought, and it was the horses, they expressed racism. And I worked with the actors, and I said, what are the phrases that are used? What phrases are used against you? And we had the absurdity of these horses spouting quite offensive language that then became a bit more distorted and illogical and so on. I haven't looked back in it, but I suspect if I went back and watched it now, I'd probably feel uncomfortable, because some of those words, in the course of that time, have become much more weight and impact and historic meaning. That if I was to redo that now, I'd probably approach it with a different attitude. But for me, I felt that it was validated in that I was doing it alongside the actors involved in it, so that we were trying to explore what is the line that causes offence. And I've always felt that, offence is such a kind of catch-all word. If somebody says they're offended by something, my instinct is to say, well, what's wrong with being offended? That's not to say that everything is game and you can say what you like and you can use whatever abusive language you care to against anyone. But I do think that if we have a set of beliefs, they should be able to withstand at least a joke about those. If they cannot withstand a joke, then maybe those beliefs aren't well supported. And I think it's important that we don't lose that sense of having debate, that we don't shut down because someone has a view that's different from ours.
How close are we? How close are we, do you think, to losing that edge and that debate?
there goes half my ear. Hang on a second.
Yeah, go on. Don't worry.
You were saying?
Yeah. Now that you've got two ears again, how close are we to losing that?
I think there is a danger because, look, if you look at the politics in America, the extreme, the fact that the Democrats and Republicans will no longer talk to each other. The last general election in the UK, between the sort of extreme position of, I think, Boris Johnson and the Brexiteers and the Corbynites and the Corbynistas who wouldn't brook any dissent. That idea of gathering towards a group who agree entirely with what you say and not in any way considering any kind of contact with anyone else, I think is going to lead to more and more extreme politics. And if, as everyone is saying, quite rightly, can we just all get on? Can't we just all come together? This experience of the pandemic has unified us. Can't we use this to come together? The only way you can come together is if you talk to each other, and talking to each other is not talking at each other, and it's not blocking or unfollowing or non-platforming someone who disagrees with you. It should involve an attempt to get behind the mindset of someone who completely disagrees with you to see where they're coming from.
It strikes me that your recent work, including obviously David Copperfield and this mini-series you're still filming, a comedy series which is set in outer space, you've moved away a little bit from the very sort of current affairs driven, politically driven satires that we know you for. Is that because you've become a little demoralized about the degree to which satire can actually make a difference in today's political world?
I think you're on a hiding to nothing if you think comedy will, change people's views. I think they can maybe illuminate something or highlight something, but I think in the end people decide for themselves. No, it's me biding my time. It's also a reaction to the fact that things like Veep and the thick of it kind of relied on there being an agreed set of norms, a set of rules by which politics was conducted. And what those shows did was show politicians perhaps compromising, bending, occasionally breaking the rules. But if Donald Trump can say, I could literally shoot a guy in the face in the middle of Fifth Avenue and still I'd be elected, there are no rules anymore. Those rules don't exist. There are no rules. So I can't show how those rules are being broken.
So Donald Trump,
it's a whole
Donald Trump has
other
killed
level of Alice in Wonderland absurdity. The coronavirus is spiking in America at the moment, and yet it's being hailed as a terrific success by the administration. Facts become fake, and news becomes fake news, and therefore I think, if you wanted to do, as I said, a kind of literal interpretation of what's happening now, I think you're far better to do it on a daily or weekly basis. But I'm standing by. I've not gone away.
But is that the thought? Armando? Is that the thought you're leaving us with? That Donald Trump is, in a perverse sense, satire-proof?
He is an entertainer. He relies on ratings. That's all he's interested in, numbers, whether the numbers that turn up at his inauguration or numbers that think he's doing a good job. So he is an entertainer. So he is, and everything he says, if it's misconstrued as far as he's concerned, he says, I was just joking. He thinks he's telling the joke. So he sees himself as the satirist. He's a self-basing satirist. That's what he is. And I think what we have to do is actually, as I say, confront him with facts. If we can do that in a funny way, great. But the facts don't exist where he is, so we have to find them.
Armando Iannucci, it's been a pleasure having you on Hard Talk. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.